G'day, welcome to Bradley's Bakehouse, where today we're going to be leveling up our sandwich loaf game and we're going to be making some milk bread. So I came up with this recipe when I really wanted to make shokupan, the Hokkaido milk bread, but I just absolutely could not be buggered to make tangzong. So I thought, what do I have here? What can I make that's going to get me in that same kind of ballpark? And I think considering this loaf probably takes about 70% of the effort as like a traditional shokupan, I think this loaf gets pretty damn close. It's definitely one of my favorite bread recipes to make. Like this would probably be my daily bread if I had to pick any of the recipes on this channel. And I think it's got a lot of like really nice versatility. So we're gonna make a single loaf. We're gonna make like a nice compressed shokupan style loaf in like a proper block form. And we're also gonna turn it into some hamburger rolls just to sort of show how versatile this recipe is. So that being said, let's crack on. Okay, so for ingredients, we have bread flour. This one's around 12.5% protein. It's more than enough for what we're gonna be doing here. We've got instant yeast. It's just instant yeast. It's not active dry. You just throw it in. I fucking hate that blooming shit. Just use instant. You'll be happier for it. We've got salt. We've got sugar. This isn't gonna be like a sweet, cakey, brioche sort of loaf. There's just a little bit of sugar in there for just like a little bit of depth and a little bit of like palatability. We've got improver. This is just a collection of enzymes that helps yeast perform a little bit more consistently and a bit better, generally speaking. I would say that it's probably optional, but if you leave it out, the texture is not going to be quite the same. It's not going to be quite that same like soft commercial sandwich bread level of soft. We've got the star of the show, which is full cream milk powder. I don't drink dairy milk, so I don't really keep full cream milk in the house. So I generally just use powdered milk for this sort of thing. It has a shelf life until the world ends, and like dry ingredients I've found, it's kind of easier to like experiment with new recipes with dry ingredients because it doesn't mess with your hydration that much. It's really easy to kind of compensate for it. So I developed this recipe using full cream milk powder. You could sub some of the water for full cream milk and you'd be fine, I imagine. We've got water. I live in Queensland, Australia, where it's like 9:30 in the morning and it's currently like 28, 29 degrees Celsius. So I use cold water to stop the fermentation from getting out of hand during kneading. If you live in a cold climate, probably stick with tepid. I don't know, I use cold water here. And we've also got butter. It's only 5% fat. It's still a pretty lean loaf, but there is gonna be like a little bit of extra browning and like a little bit of extra richness from the butter in there. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to get our flour, water, yeast, and improver mixed together into like a single sort of cohesive mass, because we're going to do a process called a fermentolyse. Now, these at-home stand mixers, and generally speaking, like planetary mixers, will never be able to quite create the amount of gluten that we need. They'll never be able to do enough gluten development to get us similar results to what you get from like a big boy spiral mixer in a commercial bakery. So we kind of need to employ a couple of tricks to get that gluten there, to get the same sort of rise and the same sort of texture from our bread, and fermentolyse is one of them. What we're going to do is we're going to mix our dough. I like to use the paddle for this bit on my stand mixer. We're gonna mix our dough until it's like a single cohesive mass, and then we're just gonna cover the bolt with a plate and we're gonna leave it for about 20 minutes. And over that 20 minutes, some kind of chemical enzymic magic's gonna happen to sort of kickstart our gluten development and give us like a little bit of a leg up when we put the dough hook in and start kneading it proper. So you can see this is prior to a fermentolyse. You can see that this just like rips, right? Like this has no elasticity, no extensibility. It shows no resistance. It just rips to pieces. See how this is covering my hands and shit like that? So this, you'll see how much more like easy to handle this dough will be in just 20 minutes of resting. So we'll just get that plate over the top, set a timer for 20 minutes and come back and we'll do the proper kneading with the dough hook. Okay, so our 20 minutes of fermentolysing are up, and as we can see, our dough has now picked up a nice little bit of stretch. See that? See how it's like, it's not just ripping as it did before. See how it's got like a little bit of stretch and a little bit of like elasticity. That's a really good sign. That means the gluten's starting to come together and develop. So now we're gonna attach our dough hook and we're gonna throw in the rest of our ingredients. So in goes our sugar, our salt, full cream milk powder, and our butter. Now, because this is only 5% fat, I've got no problem adding all the butter in at once. If this was anywhere above 8%, I would probably be adding the butter like a little bit at a time, because too much fat can kind of impede gluten development. So with it 5%, we don't really worry too much. We're gonna start our dough hook on the slowest speed just until all of that's combined. And then we're gonna turn it up to like a medium slow, so to speak. It's around 3 on my machine, and we're gonna let that just knead for probably about 8 minutes, I would say. Okay, so it's been about 8 minutes, and as we can see, our dough is very nicely formed. So we can see our dough is now smooth, and it's not sticky at all. It's like a little bit tacky, but it's definitely not sticky. And if we do our old window pane test, we tear a little bit off, see how nicely that's gonna stretch there. This is a really good test to see how your gluten's developed, right? So we have that nice window pane there, right? Really happy with that. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take our dough and we're gonna boule it up. Don't need to do this too tightly. You can just sort of like scrunch the bottoms towards the middle, right? Pinch her off, put her on the ground, and then just roll it around a little bit between your hands. Tighten up that surface tension a little bit. See how the skin's getting tighter as I pull it towards myself? Just using my pinkies for that, see? And then we are gonna set this in a container to bulk ferment for about 40 minutes, right? During this period, flavor's gonna develop, the yeast is gonna do its thing, and more gluten's gonna develop through the course of that like kind of chemical process that we mentioned before. So give it about 40 minutes, it'll probably double in size. Doubling in size is a really good thing to look for. And then after that, we are going to shape it into a loaf. We're gonna do a couple things differently with like the aesthetics of this loaf. The last white loaf that we made was very much in the style of like rustic Australian country bakehouse bread, whereas this one's gonna be more in the style of like a chocopan sort of milk loafy kind of vibe. So 40 minutes, and then we'll come back, we'll degas this, and we'll get to shaping. Okay, so 40 minutes later, our dough has pretty much doubled in size. I'm really happy with how it's looking. So we're gonna get out of this, we're gonna get it pre-shaped. We're gonna get it ready to put in our tin. So this is pretty simple, hand like a scoop. You just wanna go sort of around the edges and just sort of pull it towards the center. It's kind of just like a gentle sort of degassing. Get it all out. There you go. Here's our lovely, nice, stretchy, beautiful dough. Now, we are gonna turn this into like a Pullman style sandwich, toast loaf, block loaf, whatever you call it, where you're from. In America, I've heard them called Pullman loaves. We call them block loaves or sandwich loaves or toast loaves over here in Australia. So, but one thing that we are going to do with this is we are going to do what's called 4-piecing it, which as the name suggests, we're going to cut it into 4 pieces. So I'm going to find the total weight of it. It should be pretty close to 800 grams. Where are we at? 802.8. So that's pretty good. So 4 200-gram pieces is what we're shooting for. You'll be right. Yep, sweet. 3, and then this should just be in half. Yep, cool. I'm happy with those. So these are our 4 pieces of dough. Now, we've established a really, really nice gluten matrix in these, which we've just pissed off by cutting it and fucking around with it and doing all that stuff. So we're gonna give these a gentle rounding, not a super intense one, just a gentle rounding, much like we did before. Just gonna pinch those tops, tighten them up just a little bit on the bench. This is a really good time to preheat your oven. So we're gonna preheat our ovens to about 220. Which is quite warm, but like not insane. We're just gonna round these up and get these on the bench. And we're just gonna rest them uncovered for about 10 minutes, just let that gluten relax a little bit. There'll be a little bit of extra fermentation taking place, but not a whole lot. Not enough to really like worry about or to influence or change a whole heap. These are our 4 pieces. And we're gonna get our loaf tin ready. This is called one of 2 things, either an 800-gram loaf tin or a 680 loaf tin. It's very confusing. So 800 grams of dough is going to go into this tin, and generally speaking, it'll be cooked down to about 680 gram. That'll be the sold price of the cooked bread. I'm just gonna give this a really light oiling. There's not a super huge chance of this kind of loaf sticking, especially because it's already got fat and stuff in it. But if it does and it rips on the way out after you've done all of this work and you've finished baking it, it'll really fucking ruin your day. So just give it a light oiling. You could use butter or you could use olive oil or anything. You could even use like duck fat or something if you really wanted to avoid using like a spray oil or something like that. I'm not really fussed, you can do what you want. Okay, so 10 minutes have passed, we're ready to shape our loaf. We've got our 4 pieces here. These are nice and rested, these will be nice and malleable and nice and easy to work with. So you could probably just throw all 4 of these in there and it would be fine, but we're gonna do a little bit of stuff that's probably just gonna make it look a little bit cleaner, a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna flatten out each of our pieces of dough like this, get those bubbles out, get it nice and flat. And see, I'm not using any flour for this. This dough is really nice and easy to work with. I don't think you need to use any flour, like that's not leaving dough on the bench or anything like that. This is nice and easy, there's nothing on my hands. Really clean, easy dough. I'm gonna fold that top lip down, gonna tighten that seam, really tight, nice tight, like tiny seam. We're gonna pull and stretch, and then we're gonna fold over on itself. And we're just gonna roll that boy up, just to about that sort of position there. Sort of like a little hot dog roll, sort of like a bit of a long roll. Just gonna tighten those seams up. And we're just gonna dump that in there like so. And then we're just gonna repeat the process, showing you from a different angle. So those there. You can use the heel of your palm. Pump that down, get that nice and degassed and flat. Roll her over. Pull that seam, push down. Flatten that seam out nice. And then just roll it towards us. Nice, tight, smooth top like that. Just pinch those little ends in so it fits in the tin. And flat like that. And that's all. That's all we gotta do. So I'll just do that 2 more times. Push that one flat. Flip her over. Seam in, pump it down. Pull towards us. Thumbs on the bottom there to just tighten that up. Pinch the sides in so it's not too wide. In there like that. Last one. Flip her over. Pull it in. There we go. That is our 4-pieced loaf. In there like that. And that's gonna prove up for probably about half an hour. This one will come up fairly quickly, just because like the yeast and the sugar and stuff. Keep an eye on it. You know it's done when it gets to probably about 2/3 full on the tin. Somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4, because remember, we do want it to have some room to expand in the oven. We do want it to come up a little bit. And that leads me to my next point. We are gonna be baking this as like a Pullman or a block style loaf, which means we need a lid. If you've got a lid for your sandwich loaf, that is fantastic. Praise be to you. I've got one that I'm gonna use, but if you don't, one thing that you can do is you can just get a sheet pan and just lay a piece of baking paper over it like that, and you can just flop it like that. And if you really want it, you can put something heavy on top of it, like if you've got an old cast iron skillet or something like that. You know, if you don't have like a lid for a specific tin that you want to use, this is an alternative. I do have a lid and I'm gonna use that. We 4-piece loaves for a few reasons. Now there's a few reasons beyond it just looking cool. So if you're doing a loaf and you do it as a single piece, you might get a singular sort of air bubble that's gonna be a little bit larger than you want, and it's gonna kind of leave like a really big hole in your bread, and it's gonna sort of not be exactly what we're shooting for in this kind of loaf. So what you do when you 4-piece it is, because you're breaking up that dough, you kind of interrupt the chance of there being that air bubble, and if you do get one of those, it kind of relegates it to one section of the loaf. So it's like a little bit of insurance that your loaf's gonna be pretty evenly in texture. Okay, so about half an hour has passed, and as we can see, our loaf has come up to pretty much 2/3, I wanna say, of the sides of the loaf pan. So we're ready to lid this up and bake this. So our oven's been preheating to about 220 degrees. It's nice and hot, it's thoroughly preheated, she's good to go. Now this is the lid that I'm gonna use. This lid is designed for 3 of these things. Like 3 of these tins to sit in like that on a tin strap. I'm not baking 3 loaves of bread right now, so I'm just gonna put it in like this because it's kind of easier to carry, especially when you've got mitts on a little bit later. And this is just gonna go into the middle of our oven. And it's gonna bake for probably about 25 minutes all up, and we're gonna rotate it about 12 minutes into this bake. So pretty much halfway, just to get some even browning. My oven is a piece of dog shit. So I kind of have to baby it a little bit more. If you've got like a really nice modern fan forced oven, you probably won't have to rotate it, especially because the tin will get nice and hot and it should cook it fairly evenly. One of the really nice things about using a tin loaf with a lid is that it takes steaming out of the equation. It's the same thing when you bake like a sourdough or like a nice crusty artisanal loaf in a Dutch oven. You've created a sealed environment and the steam is going to be able to do all of its work within it. So I'm a big believer in the like at-home steam injection method. I use Peter Reinhardt's method mostly. We talk about that in the first video that I ever put on this channel. It's called Bready For Anything. So if you want details on how to do that, if you don't have a lid, you can totally bake this as a high top and it'll come out just fine. Check that video out for these steam injection tips. This is gonna go into the oven now. Okay, so about 25 minutes later, we're pulling our loaf out now. Hey, have a look at that. Straight out like a fucking, like anything. And have a look at that. Right, perfect block shape there. Straight onto a cooling rack. You don't want to let that cool on a plate or anything flat because it'll sweat down and it'll sort of ruin the interior a little bit. But how about that? Good way to tell if it's done. Turn her upside down. Give the bottom a nice tap. If it sounds hollow, you're good to go. Now you probably could push that a little bit darker if you wanted to, but I think kind of in the spirit of milk bread, Keeping it a little bit paler is kind of just a little bit more on theme and a little bit more on brand. You can see we've got the nice aesthetic from the nice 4-piecing there. We've got a nice flat top, nice flat bottom, nice flat sides. I would say all together, that's a loaf you could build a house out of, I reckon. Doesn't get much blockier than that, hey? Look at that. There you go. Now, unfortunately, we do have to wait for this to fully cool before we can slice into it. That's like a textural thing. If you cut into it now, all the steam, all the moisture is just gonna piss out, and it'll really ruin the shelf life of your loaf, and it'll really fuck with the texture. So we're gonna give this like at least an hour, probably closer to an hour and a half before we slice into it and see what the interior is like. I can just tell based on the smell and just kind of like the springiness of it that this is like really well developed. This is gonna make some beautiful, beautiful sandwiches. This is gonna be a fantastic loaf. You see these little swirls on the side, little spirals on the side? That's a very like Hokkaido-y sort of thing. It's very like typical of shokopan. Okay, so it's been a couple hours. Our milk loaf is fully cool. We're gonna cut into it and we're gonna see what the inside's like. Nice crust. There you go. Beautiful, soft, pillowy interior. Cuts like an absolute dream, even with this piece of shit bread knife. Like, have a look at that. Have a look at that for a lovely like sandwich loaf, hey? Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. Let's break bread with the... It's like just so comforting and like soft and like delightful. It's just like so easy and mild on the palate that you really could use it for anything. Like you could turn this into any kind of sandwich that you wanted, whether it was like sweet or savory. You could make a peanut butter and jam. You could make a fucking bacon sandwich in the morning. You could turn this into French toast. You could turn this into bread and butter pudding. It's like a truly super versatile loaf. Like it's not quite as sweet or cakey as brioche, but it's not quite as like lean and rustic as like the Bready For Anything, like farmhouse loaf. It's just like a beautiful, versatile player. And I think everyone should kind of have a loaf like this in their arsenal. So this was the first bread recipe that I developed on my own. And it's quite difficult to find shokopan in Australia here. Like some places sell it frozen, but it's really, really difficult to find fresh unless you live near like a specific like Japanese specialist bakery. I like needed something that took just like a little bit less effort, but still got a fairly like similar milky kind of result. And to be honest with you, like it took a couple iterations, but I think I nailed it if I'm super honest. Like the flavor profile is quite similar. The texture is quite similar again, considering we're missing that huge portion of it, which is the tanzong. And I'm not trying to say that this is like a better recipe than a traditional shokopan. It's a different recipe, certainly, but I think to get you in the same ballpark for significantly less effort, I think this recipe will serve you really nicely. Okay, so we've made like a half batch of that sandwich dough, and we're going to turn it into some rolls this time, just to sort of demonstrate how versatile this dough recipe is. So we've just finished our bulk ferment stage. So we're at the stage where we were degassing it and cutting it up into 4 pieces to then, shape our loaf with. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing again, except we've got it should be around 400 grams worth of dough, 407. So we're gonna get 4 100-gram round rolls out of this. So this is like just another thing where I think having a scale comes really in handy. I think cutting them going by eye, I think it gives me hives. Like I hate the thought of dividing these by like eyeballing them and then getting like right to the end of the process and they're all just like radically different fucking sizes. That really stresses me out. So we got our 4 pieces of dough here. We're just gonna give these a really gentle rounding and we're gonna let them again rest for about 10 minutes before we tighten them up and get them on a tray ready to proof. Okay, so our rolls have been resting for about 10 minutes, so we're gonna get to shaping them. Now, this is pretty similar to what we did to pre-shape them. We're just going to flatten it out, flip her over, and we're just gonna pull the points towards the middle. Let's get those corners in there. Flip her over. So we've got this sort of shape. So we want to do with these 3 fingers, right? It's kind of like holding a tennis ball. So as you go around in a circle, you're pulling the dough underneath and then you're rotating and you're rotating and you're tightening that surface tension. And there you have it. That's going to be our roll there, right? And after letting it rest and then sort of like pounding it out, rolling it up tightly like that, what's going to happen? And this is just a sheet tray with some baking paper on it. That's going to give us more of like a round ball-shaped roll, not like a flat, dumpy little sad fucking dome. So I recommend always doing the shaping process twice like this, let it rest for a bit and then, do the proper shape like that. I'll show you another one from this angle. So give it a good little, introduce it to the palm, give it a good little flatten, pull the points towards the center. that, roll it, and then tighten her up like that. Make sure she's good and tight. That's going to allow the maximum amount of gas to get stored in there, and that's going to give us the best rise and the best spring. Show you from a different angle here. Flatten her out, flip her over, points towards the center, keep pressure down on the middle as we're bringing it in. Flip her over, roll her out. All right, you can always pull towards, see how it's tightening that surface tension up on the top there. There you go, so you get a nice round roll. There you go, last one. Now this is a half dough recipe that I'm using for this video. I'll put that down in the bottom, or you could use the exact same thing for everything in the sandwich loaf recipe and you can make 8 rolls. I'm only gonna make 4 because it's my show and I'll do what I want. I don't want these to like poof up into each other and make like a grid. I want them to be individual rolls, so I'm just giving them like a little bit more space. I am just gonna hit these with like a cute little finishing touch, which involves a spray bottle. Just gonna spritz them down with water. So that water is gonna stop them from drying out while they're proving, and it's also gonna allow these to adhere. This is just a mix of white and black sesame seeds that I just like to put on top of these. I like a seeded bread roll. Personally, that's just me. I think the seeds add a lot of nice texture and sort of a little bit of nice like crunch and stuff. And I like a mixture of white and black just because I think it looks cool. I just think it looks cool. It looks edgy and it looks neat, and I like it. I think it looks very like modern and artisanal and like in a post-brutalist kind of way. I'm leaving that in, fuck you. And these guys are probably gonna take about 40 minutes to proof, just like the sandwich loaf did, and then we're gonna bake these with a steam injection. We'll go through that. Okay, so it's been a little bit closer to 50 minutes, maybe a little bit closer to an hour. I found that rolls take a little bit longer to proof than like a loaf in a tin or a pan will. I think it's a thermal mass thing mostly, but these guys are nice and puffy and ready to go. So for the baking of these, we're gonna do what's called a steam injection. A cast iron skillet is loaded into the oven that's preheated alongside it. So the cast iron skillet gets really, really nice and hot. That's on the bottom of the oven. The product is then loaded into the oven, and about a cup's worth of boiling water is poured into the cast iron skillet after the door of the oven is protected with a tea towel. Now it's really important, don't skip that step because you can actually shatter the oven door if you get water on there. If you're renting, that'll just really fucking ruin your day because then you have to email your real estate and just no one wants to do that. So don't put a tea towel down. Then we're gonna close the oven door and we're probably gonna drop the temperature down a little bit because that initial burst of steam, we're preheating the oven a little bit higher than normal. So we're at about 220 now. We actually wanna bake these at 200, but throwing that water in there, having the time spent with the oven door open and putting the rolls in there is gonna bring that temperature down. So we're preemptively heating it a little bit hotter so that we can kind of compensate when the temperature drops a little bit. Now, what that steam is going to do is it's gonna keep the crusts of our bread gelatinous. It's gonna delay that crust from hardening over, so the yeast can go on its little feeding frenzy and cause the dough and the bread to spring as much as possible. This is gonna get us a little bit of extra oven spring and a little bit nicer for texture, as well as like a thinner crust that's not gonna be quite so tough on the tooth. I've just dropped the oven temperature down to about 200 degrees. These are gonna bake for about 20 minutes and I'm gonna give them a little rotate about 10 minutes in. After that initial 10 minutes, the crusts have pretty much set, so if we lose any steam by opening the oven door, it's not really that big of an issue. If you wanna see these techniques explained a little bit more thoroughly, check out Bready For Anything. I also talk about it pretty thoroughly in the episode, Thank God It's a Country Loaf, where I make a sourdough using these kind of techniques. The steaming process is like a really crucial point of definition between like at-home baked bread and like bread made in like a big dog commercial oven. Commercial ovens will have a button that you press that just floods the chamber with steam and takes care of all of this for you. We have to be like a little bit creative at home, but generally speaking, it works pretty well and you can get very similar results. Peter Reinhardt in his book, The Bread Baker's Apprentice, has a really, really good sort of breakdown of how to get like similar to commercial bakery results. That's what I base a lot of this method on. I have not really felt like I needed more than what I can do with my oven. And keep in mind, like I said before, my oven is a piece of shit. So if I can do it in this oven, I'm pretty sure you can handle it in whatever oven you've got. Right, so it's been 20 minutes. Our rolls are coming out of the oven now. Have a look at those. Aren't they just beautiful? I like to bake them until there's just like a little bit of toasting on the seeds, and that kind of really activates sort of like that flavor. When you get a little bit of toastiness on those seeds, that really becomes like a really integral part of the flavor. You could bake these without seeds if you can't eat seeds, but I think the sesame seeds, I think, are an important part of this recipe. Lovely little hollow thump too. These, I'm gonna set these aside to cool. Again, always cool them on a rack, always cool your bread on a rack, stop it from sweating. Don't they just scream slam a burger in me? Super versatile dough this. You can make rolls out of it, you can make a sandwich loaf out of it. If you didn't have a tin, you could absolutely do like a half loaf with this. Just keep your temperature down a little bit to stop the sugar from burning. Nice sort of deep color. I don't want to bake them pale. I want a little bit of like nice caramelization on the edges. I want a little bit more color. I want a little bit of crust, you know? I think that's kind of one of the beautiful things about homemade bread is that you can bake it to the color that you want it to. Like these have been in the oven for 20 minutes. These are cooked. You could have pulled them out a couple minutes earlier if you wanted a nice blonde one. You could have left them in for a couple minutes more if you wanted something crustier. That's the thing, is that you have the freedom to do that. It's your choice. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Bradley's Bakehouse. I certainly hope you got something from it. I have been very proud of this recipe since I wrote it. I think it is absolutely up there with one of the most versatile sort of sandwich breads that you can make. If I have to make a loaf of bread for the house for the week or whatever, 9 times out of 10, this is probably what I'm gonna make. I've made it as like this sort of compressed block sandwich loaf style. I've made it as like a nice high top with some nice pretty scoring and like some dusting. I've covered it in seeds and baked it. I've done all sorts of things with it. It is an incredibly versatile dough recipe, and you can turn it into just about anything that you want, whether you want like a hamburger roll, or you could turn it into long rolls or anything like that. You could turn it into knot rolls. You could do just about anything with this dough recipe. If some of the techniques in this, or like for instance, if you'd like to learn how to hand knead something like this, if you don't have a mixer like I do, check out episode 1, Bready For Anything, where it's kind of like an ultimate crash course in just developing gluten and how that whole world sort of works. There's a little bit more information. I go a little bit more in depth, and have fun baking. I certainly hope you try one of these recipes. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below. That's all I'm going to say for today. Have a good day. Thanks for watching.